This is Mark Lieberman, the host of the radio show The World According to Mark, brought to you through WPVM FM in Asheville, North Carolina, streaming globally on WPVMFM.org. My guest today is Julie Kinter. Julie Kinter is a actor, director, and many things with a theater close to Asheville, North Carolina called the Heart Theater. And full disclosure is I am in a play that she is currently directing. And the story about her and the play and why it's important is something that I wanted our listeners to hear about. So first, let me thank Julie for being on the show today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So we first ran across each other back last year during auditions for The Diary of Anne Frank. And as everybody no doubt knows, theaters were in a challenging position in 2020. This particular show, The Diary of Anne Frank, was supposed to go on stage almost a year ago to the day, if I'm not mistaken, and it didn't. And instead of 2020, it's now happening in 2021. So tell us first a little bit more about your experiences in theater and your experiences with the Heart Theater, Julie.
Well, I joined their volunteers back around 2001, just doing box office things, and then it kind of grew to backstage things, then it grew to stage managing. I did that for several years and added acting and directing in those years. I've since directed about 20 plays and been in about 15. And I've also served on their board. I'm their bookkeeper and all things organization, basically.
So you're a full-fledged volunteer, although you do get paid from time to time, probably way too little for what services you provide to the theater. But full disclosure is you weren't always working with theater. You are a nurse and you worked in the trauma center. Leading question here, did anything about working in the trauma center prepare you for the theater?
Well, actually, I did that in labor and delivery, and working with surgeons, working with neurosurgeons in the trauma center taught me to anticipate the needs of a director. It came in real handy with stage managing. So that was a big part of it, and just juggling lots of things at once.
And as birthing a baby anywhere near similar to birthing a play?
Ooh.
You don't have to answer that. It was a comedic lead.
It is. It's just a lot longer labor process.
Right. Okay. So, and it's typically only one at a time in the labor and delivery, although exceptions to that. But in any event, so here we are. And one of the things that I was interested in, besides talking about the play and, encouraging people to take an interest in this, and we're not promoting the play in terms of participation, but it is playing at the Heart Theater at the end of the month and then goes into October, is I think there's something very resonant about the play in today's times. I'm sure people could make the same statement 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But in terms of the messaging and the context for the play, there's a lot of important parallels or things to be learned from that history, and hopefully some lessons. But let me ask you right off, Julie, was there anything about what's going on in the world today or what's going on in your world that led you specifically to be interested in directing this play?
Well, at the time that I was asked um, to direct it, things hadn't come to a head with a lot of the things that we've been seeing in the last couple years. And my executive director approached me to direct it in part because he knew my background, knows my background, and thought that that it would suit me and that I would find the passion that I have for it. Because he knows that I'm 100% German. He met my parents before they passed away, and his partner actually, my dad did some translations for his partner. Um, so there was that's where it started originally. But since then, it's obviously grown into so much more. You may have mentioned, or I know we've talked outside of this, that certain plays were picked to be that were put on hold in 2020 to bring to 2021. And logistically, one of the reasons, of course, was that this isn't as expensive as a musical. They cost a lot in royalties and rights, especially if you end up having to cancel and so on. So this was easier to stay on. But when it was decided to keep it on, it was also because we just kept all saying, boy, is this so relevant, even more than when we picked it a year or two ago.
Well, that's important, and I'm glad you brought up the first point, which is theaters across the country, and certainly in Western North Carolina, have all suffered with attendance, with closures, with making modifications. Instead of doing full out performances or inside performances or even outside, many turn to virtual productions. And I know that the Hart Theater did some of that as well. And obviously that was really sort of improvising on short notice. And it was moderately effective, I guess, at various theaters. But I think it's safe to say it's not a substitute for a live performance. But because of the loss of revenue, because of the fact that even community theater has expenses associated with it, I understand what you're saying about making decisions instead of doing, a musical with, 30 or 40 cast members and singers and all of that. Anne Frank is a more modest cast and doesn't have the same costs associated with it.
Right.
But let's talk a bit about, again, why this play is so resonant. I mean, regardless of background, and your background as a person with a German heritage obviously would make you particularly sensitive to some of the themes. Some of it may make you feel uncomfortable. I'm not certain of that. But what is it about the play, and if we can focus in on the diary itself, that you think needs to be said again and again?
Well, it's so at its core and at its beauty, it is a diary written by a 13-year-old as she grows to be 15 years old, and her view of the world from that perspective, and how pure it is at that age, and yet also incredibly insightful for a 13-year-old. I wish I could see that kind of insightfulness in today's youth. And I'm sure there are some, but boy, she was particularly insightful. And uh, um, I think the messages that she has are so critical to humankind or mankind, and the can we endure time at the with all the other things that are happening right now, that we're letting overpower compassion and empathy and tolerance for one another, tolerance for our differences. um, we're just letting so much intolerance and hate seep into our moral fiber anymore, that I feel like we're not listening to each other anymore. We're forgetting that that underneath our different um, opinions about things, there's a heart and there is love. There are people who have love for other people. It's kind of hard to describe for me, but it's just, we've got to get back to that. Is where I guess I'm going, and maybe get back to our 13-year-old selves before we're so tainted by the hate and or very narrow-minded thinking of just one way of seeing the world. And that was just what was so beautiful about her, is she could see how some people saw the world and yet could still appreciate the broader sense of everything. And of
Well,
course is so famous for that, that in spite of everything, I think everybody is good at heart.
and that's somewhat of a paraphrase of what was actually in the diary and what is also in the play and in the various theatrical depictions of it. But talking about her specifically, there is something remarkably unusual about her, and yet at the same time, it seemed to me that there was something also that resonates with youth in general. I mean, 13-year-old people, boys, girls, whatever, tend to be idealistic. They also tend to be moody, and they tend to be in their own heads, and they are dramatic. And some of that, to me, it seems, comes out in the diary. But
Yes.
the way you spoke of it points also to things about her, again, that were unique for a person of that age, but let's not forget for the times she was going through. So she was a 13-year-old, had a relatively uh, good life, obviously, before Nazism spread from Germany, where she was born, to Amsterdam, or to the Netherlands, where they had migrated. And ultimately, they had to go into hiding. And the going into hiding brings up issues about lockdown in this world, in the United States, here in North Carolina, quarantining. And somehow or other, she brought perspective to that, which would be useful if more of us could see the both the positive and negative elements of being in a secluded situation, shall we say. So I wonder how you feel about that, and to what extent you think that those are important messaging issues for our times.
Yes, I really have to say that it was rather dismaying to see the reaction to being told that we need to do this for the good of all. And to me, it was a small sacrifice to make, but especially in comparison to the sacrifices they had to make. Uh, we still had so much that we could still do, and actually, it gave us the opportunity to stop a little bit in our fast-paced world to take stock of what's really important in life instead of, where technology has taken us, so that everybody's got to constantly look at their phone and who's checking on what and what's going on with this, that, and the other. And I and the whole idea that it is about how does one define rights and freedoms, personal rights and freedoms, um, and for example, to wear a mask or not to wear a mask. Is that such a huge sacrifice to do that? I mean, nobody likes it, um, but are we doing it for the good of all? I mean, why? It just feels like something in the trajectory that we've been going in these last 20 years with the speed of technology has also narrowed our focus to be so self-centered, actually. And I just look at what Anne and her family and friends in the annex had to endure and sacrifice, and there's just absolutely no comparison.
Well, I certainly get that point. There, false analogies, and let's just be upfront on it. The a number of the conspiracy movements that have been at work now for several years, and they didn't start with Donald Trump, but we saw a rise in declaration of what are my rights. What is my right to carry a gun? What is my right not to be vaccinated? What is my right not to have to wear a mask if I don't feel like wearing a mask? Or, what is the role of government? I mean, those are issues that, we can look at in the context of what happened in this story about Anne and her family and the fellow travelers that were boxed up in this annex. But one of the things that I see in this as well is over and over again, we get indications from Anne, from her monologues about, yes, she'd like not to be cooped up. Yes, she would like to be with her friends, ride her bicycle, do all the things that she was used to doing. But at the same time, I'm not giving the play away, but she refers to what she's going through with her family and the other occupants as an adventure. And she's not just putting it on, that is the way she feels. And so she's accepting, again, the good and the bad at the same time. And I think what you alluded to earlier is there doesn't, to a large extent, there seems to be no acceptance by a large group and a large contingent of people who are resisting, what is being recommended, what is being suggested, in some cases, what is being mandated, because it's an infringement on what some people believe are their God-given rights. And even those people who are going along with this, I doubt if they can exhibit, or if they do exhibit, the optimism that Anne brings into this play. I don't hear anybody, who says, I don't want to go shopping anymore, or I don't want to go to the theater anymore, or I don't want to have, indoor meals with my friends. The most you tend to have people say is, I'm dealing with it. But here, Anne was dealing with it, but she was dealing with it in a remarkable way. What's your sense of that, Julie?
Absolutely. And with a maturity that kids at that age, their brains at that point in development don't tend to know how to rationalize and do other things that she seemed to already be learning on her own. And I think that all that time alone that she did spend with her diary, writing things down, helped her work those things out in her mind. And especially not having friends, not being able to go out um, to be with friends, to, when you have a girlfriend and you're going through all these uh,
Changes.
changes with hormones and everything else, that together you can figure this stuff out. Are you feeling this too? And are you doing that? And are your parents driving you crazy too? And so she had only her diary to work that out with. And she actually even, in the diary of Anne Frank that I've read, I don't know if there's multiple versions, but she always referred to her as Kitty. So
She personifies the diary. The diary is another person to her.
Yeah. So that was her sounding board. And I think it really helped her grow up to do that. What a better way to spend your time than I can think some kids do today. Not to sound like, oh, kids and when I was a kid kind of sounding person. You know? It does seem very different.
Again, let me say, I don't want to suggest that that what she was going through and the way she was dealing with it, some people are also not employing and dealing with COVID and dealing with, having to mask up again. And do we need more booster shots? I do think some people, I just don't think they own up to it or admit it, that being more at home, where you make more meals, you don't just go to a place and have them serve it to you, where yes, you can watch 16 versions or 16 episodes of some Netflix thing, but some people are using it more creatively. Some people are reading more. Some people are picking up a musical instrument. Some people are, blogging is another form of writing. It's not too dissimilar in many respects to writing in a diary. I think people are doing that. But what, again, I see in this play is Anne seems to do it with relish. I mean, she, again, as I said, she clearly sees the limitations of being cooped up and having to be among family members and having her privacy jeopardized and so on and so forth. But as you say, she's using the diary and making it almost a human being in form, but she's also connecting. She's connecting with her sister. She's always connected with her father. Towards the middle, towards the end of the play, she seemed to reconnect in a certain way with her mother. And as a young teenager, as going through hormonal changes, etc., she's discovering, a level of intimacy that she expresses to Peter, one of the other individuals in the play and in her life, who she related to, the only boy essentially that she was going to see. And then because of ultimately what happened, the only boy she ever had a relationship after they entered into the annex. Those are good lessons. And I don't think I know people are experiencing that, but I don't hear people expressing that. They talk about the negative parts of this. I can't travel. I can't go to Europe. I can't do it's all morphed into that sort of discussion.
Yeah, and a lot of the passages that do talk about, oh, I need to be more this, I need to be more that, or it's really unclear. Did she figure out a lot of these insights on her own, or did she say these things in to her diary after one of her parents said, you need to be more like this, or you need to see things like that? It does, there is that question in my mind. So how much influence did her parents have on the way she was able to digest what was happening to her, and resolve things and move forward and slowly see things as a grown up, so as she often referred to them as. Uh, and it's a question for today's parent. How involved are you in your child's growing up as they're going through things? Are you aware of those changes and moods, and how are you dealing with them to be supportive? Um, it's a huge part of becoming.
I want to reintroduce Julie Kinter, the director of the Hart Theater's production of The Diary of Anne Frank. And Julie has had an extensive career with Hart, and she's breathing, I'll say she's breathing new life into this production, which has been done many, many times. But again, having experienced it to some extent right along with you, I was amazed and gratified, frankly, that you were bringing us sort of a serious education role in this play. The cast members got a very extensive bibliography, or a reading list, and nobody was compelled and didn't make us do homework and answer questions, but an extensive bibliography from the diary, the original diary, or modifications of it through the years, to other people that had written diaries talking about the Holocaust, and many other works, essentially, that have tried to capture the Holocaust. And I want you to, if you would, talk about that a little. And then I want to talk about, again, we asked the question, why is it important? And we'll get to that in a minute. But tell us why it was important. And the other thing I'll mention is sort of an inside secret. Because of your fluency in German, you drilled us, some of us more than others, on the more correct pronunciation of the various concentration camps and other German words and people's names. Why did you do that? Except to harass us.
Because I think it's important. I don't know. Maybe it's the German in me that is just very particular and a perfectionist, or I mean, there's certainly that, but I think it brings it alive to hear it pronounced the right way instead of with an American accent. It just makes it more real to me for everybody to hear it that way. It will, I hope, pull the audience in to hear it that way. I mean, some people don't like foreign languages and it turns them off. They get uncomfortable. But if that happens, that's okay. Then I think we're doing the right thing, because this shouldn't be completely a comfortable experience. To have to take this journey with Anne and the families. Some of it is funny, and because it's real life, and it's like, oh, this is what happened today, and but then there is the darker side to the darker backdrop to it all, and I want to pull people into that as best I can.
I'm sure that there are other plays or theatrical productions where, again, these different layers are mixed, as you just mentioned, where, you have Anne saying something very teenage-ish, so to speak, and then saying something very profound at the same time, where you have her saying something that's very dark, a recognition of the way things are, at the same time, followed by something which is, again, quite humorous. And again, not to give away the play, there is some humor in the annex, and that's exactly what you would have expected. You wouldn't have expected people living under those circumstances for over 2 years to just be completely down in the dumps. They would never have presumably survived. They might have, you know, killed each other, or fled, or whatever. So, but I've never seen it done I've never seen those currents in such an intimate way. And maybe that's a reflection of the actual diary itself. And also I think it's a reflection of the way you're directing the show. What's your take on that?
Well, I've told you this outside of this meeting, that I don't and haven't ever seen other versions of the play or the movie or anything, because I want this to be, purely from the heart, my heart anyway, and so that I can bring to it my own passion and compassion for these people, and certainly my background has a lot to do with that. My parents were children during the war. My grandfather had tobacco and sugar factories, and his business partner was Jewish. And there wasn't, it reminded me a little bit when I watched Schindler's List many years ago about their circumstances and how he had to, um, I think they basically put the company in his name, and so that he could protect his partner's part of the assets. And I think the partner actually did get out of the country in time, so that later on after the war he was able to give his share, because he, I think, integrated with the state and dissolved his part of the partnership. And then things like having to join the Nazi party just to look like you were cooperating. Um, I grew up listening to all their experiences and memories of what it was like to be in the war.
I'm losing you a bit, Julie. Maybe you can move a little closer to the mic.
Um, and can you hear me now?
Yes.
And they're, how they would suddenly, some certain friends just weren't there anymore in school, and um, so many memories of things that they endured, including all the bombings and the air raids. Visiting my mom's family, they had Moroccan soldiers take over their homes, and they had to stay in the basement part of the house. And then when the Moroccans moved out, the disgusting degradation. I mean, everything from the urinating in the kitchen to, you name it. And there's just so many other atrocities and sides to the war, but my parents definitely honed in to, as a kid, the atrocity of the occurred to the Jewish people.
So I think you were talking earlier, Julie, about your parents and the fact that they were in Germany as young persons and had to deal with a very difficult situation of uh, not wanting to put themselves in physical jeopardy, yet at the same time not wanting to subscribe to a lot of what was going on under the Nazi banner. I guess that's true. Has that resonated with you in terms of your views generally, and also perhaps with your championing these issues when it comes to, for example, this play?
It does. I it's been hard to explain to people close to me how, for the outside person, like an American, they're having trouble understanding how so many Germans could just stand by and let that happen. And all I know is that it was, everybody was in survival mode at that point. It wasn't only a political thing because people were afraid for their lives. I mean, the Hitler and Nazi regime really wanted to wipe out all other parties and other ways of thinking. So you had to cooperate, or you would die. And they created so many different penalties on anybody that I think it paralyzed you. I would have to imagine, on top of all the other economic things that they were dealing with as the war went on, uh, supplies and
Rationing.
rationing foods, everything was just a struggle. So
Well, I
yeah.
want to bring into the conversation again something that I did a little bit of research on it, which is disturbing, and it really, again, speaks to the issue of why plays like The Diary of Anne Frank and other depictions and reading is so important. There have been a number of reports up to the present, but even going back a few years, showing a, a lack of real knowledge on the part of people in Europe. There was a survey done in England recently came out, and the survey was done with people who were responsible for education about the Holocaust, and less than half were able to identify that there were only 1% of the German pre-war populations that were Jews to begin with. And many of them did not have any idea how many millions of Jews and others that were exterminated and executed and so on and so forth. A surprisingly large number. And there have been other studies in the United States that 1 out of 10 adults don't recall ever hearing the word Holocaust. And I mean, it's just surprising. And that in other countries and in this country, in particular, amongst the millennials and the so-called Gen Zers, they can't name a single concentration camp. They believe that there were a relatively small number of Jews and other people that were killed. And they just show a complete lack of the knowledge of what happened. And that has a pretty negative effect, I think, in terms of the way people approach, again, some of the issues that we're looking at today, and why people are not seeing or not appropriately disturbed by what's happening today. And I wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, I think about that at the time that in my childhood, the Holocaust had only occurred about 40 years prior. And it's hard to believe that it's been 80 years, because in my mind, it it still seems that not that long ago. And so it is disturbing to me that people are already forgetting, and even more horrifying that they're denying it. Um, and as that generation is dying off, that can tell their experiences and bear witness, I I it's so important that their stories live on and continue to be told, because there is a precedent there that we cannot keep doing. It When does it end? That there have been other parts of the world that have had similar things happen in our own lifetimes, as far as massive extermination of peoples. And I don't know. This is
History keeps repeating itself, and there's been more eloquent use of that phrase than that. But it's it's important to remember and to know what happened then in order to understand what might be or could be and is happening. I mean, we can't deny that across the world on any given day, there is something going on in many, many countries. Then we can call it ethnic cleansing, because that's a term that's often employed these days, but that's not in any way different than what was happening in Germany. It was, again, in reading about some of the backdrop of the rise of Nazism, it was a nationalist movement. It arose after World War One, when Germans in particular didn't feel that they got a fair deal from the Treaty of Versailles, and maybe they didn't. And then it wasn't a huge jump from that to say, well, why did that occur, and why did we lose World War One to begin with? And then there's surprising buy-in in Germany at the time to a conspiracy notion that Jews, again, made up less than 1% of the population, immigrants and other undesirables, were behind the loss of World War One, were traitors. And again, it's not that difficult to make the leap to compare that to what we heard again in the 2016 election, where the principal slogan was, make America great again. And, to me, that phrase has always been bothersome, not because of the first three words, make America great. That seems like a good idea. But the again part leaves the impression that something happened that made America less great. And let's acknowledge the fact that one of the things that happened, according to people that liked and still like that slogan, is we elected in this country for the first time a Black American, African American, mixed race person as president. And that's possibly what all that meant. So it's not hard to see the parallels. And if we can't look back at what was happening in Nazi Germany during the time that is depicted in the play and is illustrated in the diary, then where are we going to learn these lessons? So that's me talking. What's your take again on that, Julie?
Well, I'm always driven to make very idealistic statements, um, in that I my mom was really very open-minded and in educating herself. She was a devout Christian, but she also studied all religions and imparted a lot of that on us. And I think I, in my idealistic view, it's kind of along with the old "can't we all just get along" thing. It's, if you really stop to learn, there are the similarities are quite astounding, and it's almost to me that the differences in religions have more to do with what part of the globe you were born in as to how it developed. And but today it's become a point of fear. um, with after 9/11, the Muslim or Islam religion became something to fear rather than understanding that those atrocities were extremists, not the people who follow Islam. And and this is a bit of an aside, but since we've been commemorating 20 years since that occurred, um, it brought to mind for me the fact that we've never really had a world war on our soil, and that was the closest thing we've ever had to experiencing what it was like to have a war going on in your own country, in your own city. And you look at the World War Ones and twos in Europe, and those people were bombed daily. They were experiencing hunger and everything else. And I think that is a part of history that Americans don't ha- because they didn't experience it, they don't truly understand it. They can't fully immerse any sense of empathy on it because, I mean, they lost sons and husbands and that kind of thing. We had ration books here, but we still were pretty darn rich in comparison to what was going on over there. And now you can make the same comparison to Afghanistan and many other places. So for me, the gender, I mean, the race thing and the religion thing are points that people have chosen to fear and be intimidated by rather than trying to, again, idealistically thinking, let's embrace the differences. What do we each bring to the table that can make things great together rather than it's only got to be my way, it can't be your way, that kind of thinking.
Well, I think again, and I think the play itself deals with this to an extent, but I think what happens in people's conceptualizing or trying to conceptualize things is we demonize people, we demonize and we stereotype and we generalize. So using Afghanistan, for example, what you brought up is, yeah, there was a situation where the country was caught unprepared. They didn't really understand exactly who the people were that perpetrated it and who funded it. And we're still learning about that now. And some of what we were told was obviously untrue, false, lies. Let's use that expression. But it mobilized and galvanized the country in a particular way, which is we're not going to take this and we're going to go. And, our president at the time, George W. Bush, we're going to go after you. We're going to get you. So they did that. And then for 20 years, we were doing a bunch of other things. And the same thing, again, could be said from a much earlier war, Vietnam. We were afraid of what was going on. We were afraid of the communists. There was something that I don't hear people talking about called the domino theory, that if we didn't stop it, there, that all these other countries that would have been, quote, theoretically democratic and friendly to the United States would become victims of communists. And you hear it, and you hear that again today. When people, particularly Republicans and on the right, are criticizing policies on the left, and particularly the Democrats, all of a sudden these words come out. They're socialists, they're Marxists. And the labeling, I think, is what is particularly concerning, because then you don't have to think anymore about what's real. You just say, these people belong into that class, just like the Jews belonged in the class of undesirables in Germany, as did gays, as did, gypsies, as did, immigrants in general. And we are still seeing that today. And it's alarming. And again, obviously, I don't expect that the Diary of Anne Frank that is being produced and performed at the Hart Theater is going to change the course of the world, but it's hopeful that some people will come to see that show who maybe haven't seen it or didn't appreciate it or saw it in earlier times, and hopefully in their minds make some comparisons and shift briefly their viewpoints. And again, maybe that's asking too much, certainly asking too much of you as the director. And again, for those tuning in, this is an interview with Julie Kinter, the director of the Diary of Anne Frank at the Hart. But what's your idealistic hopes for what this play will do to those people who are seeing it?
Well, yes, certainly. If it opens their minds and allows them to, however briefly, step into their shoes and feel the struggles that they endured because of what they believed or how they believed, that would be a pretty major accomplishment. And it would be even greater if they were able to make that leap to today, what's going on today. Um, our educational system here, as good as it is, I think we are lacking in history and civics and those things. When you mention throwing around terms like socialism and stuff, I'm hearing people say that don't even know what it is, because they say it in a context that clearly makes me understand that they think it's something that it's not. We really have to educate our kids better so that they can come into the adult world to make it a better world, and fulfill the hopes that Anne Frank had for mankind.
Well, I would say, Julie, again, if you'll indulge me, I feel like you are a person who appreciates the importance of these issues, fears some of the negative consequences, but retains a degree of idealism. And if you'll permit me, and then I'll let you speak to it, I do want to paraphrase or read what I think is a sort of the undercurrent of those issues coming together from the play. And that is, it's a wonder, Anne says, I haven't abandoned all my ideals. They seem so absurd and impractical, yet I cling to them because I still believe, in spite of everything, that people are truly good at heart. She goes on, I see the world being slowly transformed into a wilderness. I hear the approaching thunder, and that one day will destroy us too. I feel the suffering of millions, and yet, when I look up at the sky, I somehow feel that everything will change for the better, that the cruelty too shall end, that peace and tranquility will return once more. I mean, that is one of the most powerful passages in the play and possibly of the diary, but it reflects a person who has extraordinary self-awareness and yet has not allowed that self-awareness of the horrible things to bring her down into thinking that at the other end of the arch, so to speak, something good is going to happen. I feel like you expressed that very well, Julie, and you have expressed that on this show. And I'm guessing that that's one of the things you're putting into the show.
Yeah, I love that passage too. I feel like today, every time something happens, like I remember what it felt like revisiting it Saturday when 9/11 occurred, and even when the COVID thing really kind of hit its chord originally, you feel this sense of hopelessness, and you can allow yourself to succumb to it, or you have to go on to you really embrace those idealisms so that maybe you can get out in the world and make some of them happen in whatever small way you do it. You can have an impact, and she understood that.
Well, I think also that as far as a lesson for today, we're going through some horrible things. The newscasters frequently, too frequently, in my opinion, use the phrase unprecedented to describe anything that's happening. And there's nothing really that happens that's unprecedented. It's just a different resurrection of something that happened before. But what I'm trying to get to is the deal is you can be a realistic person and not Pollyanna-ish, and not dismissive of the threat. But the next step should not be to turn all your vitriol on people that you suppose are in some way responsible. But you need to then believe that there are enough people out there that you can communicate with on some level that you can turn things around and not make it a horrible experience. That's how I see it. It sounds like that's how you see it.
Yes, I agree.
Well, it's been a pleasure having Julie Kinter on the show today to talk about the play, The Diary of Anne Frank, the life of Anne Frank as depicted in the diary, and her perspectives, and frankly, some of my perspectives about why this is so important. And I want you to tell people who are interested in this and who are interested in seeing the play how they can find out more about it.
Well, Hart Theater, Haywood Arts Regional Theater has a website. It's hearttheater.org, and it's spelled with two T's in the middle and an a R-E at the end. So Heart Theatre at .org and not .com. The website has a calendar showing all our show dates, and we'll take you to ticketing site if you want to purchase tickets. You can also call our box office at 456-6322. That's area code 828. And it does open September 24th and will run through October 10th on Thursday, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. Our Sundays are 2 p.m. matinees, and our other shows are always at 7:30 p.m.
And I hasten to mention that the theater takes its obligations during these COVID times to take those precautions seriously. And anybody who wants to attend ought to want to wear a mask. Thank you again for being on the show, Julie. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank my producer, Focus Solutions, Shelley Lieberman, for helping produce the show today.
Thank you so much.